So I think I'll just kind of frame what we're talking about kind of with divestment right now, how it's evolved in Canada, where we're at, and I think kind of really the takeoff moment that we're going to see and that we're at right now, and I think in 2014 is really going to escalate. So this campaign started up in Canada around February, January was when sort of campaigns started emerging, and there was sort of a national framework where we started to see a few campaigns going on. So we were a few months behind the US, with I think Toronto and McGill, U of T and McGill being kind of the earliest adopters of it. And in less than a year, there's now over 30 campus campaigns, upwards of 40 when you include the groups that are talking about it and in the process of making a campaign but haven't rolled it out yet. That goes up to closer to 50 when you just talk about the established off-campus campaigns, and that's not taking into account the fact that there are dozens of folks connected with faith-based communities, with pension funds that are now really starting to have a really meaningful conversation about pursuing divestment at some level. And so I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say that we're probably going to see this grow up towards 100 campaigns by the middle of next year or by early spring. And we're working a lot right now to try and kind of, it's been a fun and sometimes exhausting process, because this is the first time in nearly a decade of organizing against the tar sands that I've had a campaign that's running faster than I am. And been involved in one, and so a lot of the work we do is spent trying to figure out like what's going on and following developments, and it's really been great. And I think finally we're kind of at the point where it's almost caught up, and now it's going to go explode a lot faster again. So things are really going to keep growing. And so I think it's important to kind of frame this in terms of what we're doing and what divestment also focuses on. Because on the one side, we're going to hear a lot about the economic side, but divestment is also a powerful moral tool. And it's a really powerful tool in the sense that it's the single campaign within sort of this bigger climate and tar sands movement in this country that's going toe-to-toe with every single fossil fuel company, or at least the biggest 200 of them, and drawing a hard line and saying no. It's the single campaign that's really, in this way, saying we will not consent to be a part of institutions that are taking this forward. And I think there's a lot of power in that, because it's not the first time that there haven't been groups who have said that, but just the traction that that's starting to get, and what that represents in terms of such a necessary shift in how we talk about climate change and environmental destruction, is that we're really naming and acknowledging that we have an enemy, we have an opponent, and we have to go after them where it hurts. And in that case, we're going after them financially, but part of the reason we're going after them financially is because of a moral and political strategy. And that when we do this, and when we engage in divestment, and when we say to our institutions, we will not allow you, we will not consent to being complicit in funding and bankrolling climate change, and funding and bankrolling environmental destruction and environmental injustice in frontline communities, what we're doing is we're morally bankrupting them. And that's the first step, and that's what they're afraid of. The CEO of Exxon had said that in one interview in the United States on divestment, and recently in an article in the Financial Post on the divestment movement in Canada, a spokesperson for CAP said they were very, very closely following and monitoring the rise of the divestment campaign and the threat it posed to their social license. And the social license is their ability to operate. Because if you do not have a social license, you cannot build new projects. People will reject it. You can't buy research institutions on campuses. You can't, as CAP is right now, dump $1.5 million into the Canadian Museum of Civilization and then tell them they can't put pictures of tar sands mining trucks because there's a negative connotation for the industry up in the museum. And so as we start to erode that and take it away, we're taking away the ability of this industry to act with the impunity that they've been able to, that's led to the climate crisis. And in that sense, what I mean by that is there was a report that came out last week, maybe 2 weeks ago. I'm kind of lost track of time with you on climate talks and exactly what's happened when. But there was a report that came out that said that over 60% of global climate emissions to date are the result of 90 named entities, most of which are corporations. Some of them are state-owned oil companies, but the vast majority of them are corporations. That means 2/3 of the climate crisis are caused by 90 companies. And so I think that's really, when I think about it, where that power in divestment lies, because we're finally taking them on and we're taking away their ability to do that and continue to act in that way and continue to use the atmosphere as unchecked dumping ground, continue to disregard Indigenous rights and the rights of other frontline communities. And we're really kind of bringing this all together into a new movement that's just also driven such a new energy, I think, into climate organizing. And that's why I personally am just consistently inspired by the amazing organizing that's going on in so many different places across the country to take this forward. And especially here at U of T, it's taking on the biggest endowment in Canada, $1.5 billion. And to kind of put that into context, when we were Mark and I were both at the launch of the divestment campaign at UBC about a month, maybe 6 weeks ago, and they had a presentation from a researcher at the school, Justin Ritchie. Justin had done a bunch of research looking into the endowment at the University of British Columbia, and UBC's endowment's about $1 billion. I think maybe it's a little bit less than that. And he had calculated that of that $1 billion, about 100 million of it was invested in fossil fuels. And it kind of broke it down to a few companies other. And what that meant for that school was UBC as a school projects itself in a very sustainable image, as everything Vancouver and BC tends to do. We're really, embrace the whole moving, pushing it forward thing. And UBC's really kind of puts it forward. We're a sustainable school, and so they report out their emissions that their school produces. And their school produces 60,000 tons of carbon dioxide a year, which is pretty low. For BC and Vancouver, it's not that low. Simon Fraser's at about 20, UVic's closer to 18 or 17. But it's still, for a school the size of UBC, that's pretty low. And most schools do this, because a lot of schools, especially in Canada, really project forward and try and fight for sustainability awards, whether it's in their research or how their school is projected. So 60,000 is what they emit. Their investments emit 550,000. So they have a carbon shadow 9 times the size of the reported emissions that they are taking pride in for their climate action. And what that meant to me, to hear it, is that without divestment, no institution, be it a school, be it a pension fund, be it a church, be it anything, can ever actually claim to be addressing climate change. You cannot green your operations if you're emitting 500,000 tons of CO2 until you've addressed that as well. And so not addressing divestment, I think, and this is where it starts to tie in from the moral as also into talking about the economic implication of that, is fundamental to anyone putting forward that. So I think that's really a huge piece of how we talk about this, move this forward, and how we talk about kind of what the carbon shadow of these schools are and how that ties to liabilities and climate, and then also I think what Mark's going to really dig into around the economics of it. So thanks everyone for coming out. Mark, who's going to speak next, will make up an introduction before I go. But Mark, as you introduced earlier, works at the Canadian Center for Policy Alternatives and wrote a report earlier in this year called Canada's Carbon Liabilities. And it's been an amazing tool for the divestment movement here, because it really takes a lot of what's been coming out in the global scale around the risks of staying invested in dirty energy and high carbon fossil fuels, and takes it and really puts it into a context of Canada, of what our carbon budget is, and also the implications for things like tar sands that we have here at such high carbon and dirty energy. Mark.
All right.